3% over the prior year. But the real story under those numbers is really what's happening with mega deals. You think about it, deal value in the third quarter was almost 500 billion, and there were 19 mega deals in there. And what's driving people to do these mega deals is what you're talking about, Tom, is the availability of capital. You think about the cash on balance sheets, you think about private equity dry powder, and look, you think about how well the stock market's been doing recently. A lot of these deals were done with a mix of cash and stock.
And that story.
As I step back, the one other thing to think about with those mega deals is it really is a drive for scale, because 8 of those top 10 deals were done horizontal deals. So they were to go into acquire competitors in new markets. And 9 out of those top 10 were done in the same industry. So think semiconductor, think healthcare, think biotech.
And we started with that thought from Mark Gorman of Morgan Stanley talking about their acquisition of Eaton Vance. How much more consolidation are you expecting? Any more mega deals within the banking sector in particular?
Yes, I think banking sector will be hot. Still think healthcare will be hot, and we are expecting more mega deals. I was, quite frankly, a little bit surprised at the number of 19, which is pretty impressive. But we think with the availability of capital, we do think just M&A is going to sort of lead us out of this recession and recover quicker than the overall economy. And again, it's just the system is awash with capital, and people are searching for scale and to transform their business after COVID, right? To mold their business to be fit for purpose for what might have happened to their customer base and what might have happened to their industry dynamics.
So then there's this question of regulatory pressure, and I'm thinking particularly of the tech sector. There's been calls by Democrats to break up some of the big tech leaders. Those pretty much aren't probably going to get through, but they could potentially stymie other acquisitions. Do you expect some of those kinds of deals to dry up based on that pressure?
I think that regulatory pressure is always going to be there, and it's going to put pressure on that sector. So yes, I do think that's going to be something that sector is going to have to deal with in the near future.
I want to talk about defensive transactions. I don't know if that's what Mr. Gorman did yesterday or others, but sometimes strategically it's selling to the board or boards plural that we got to do this because if we don't do it, the other guy will do it. Is that game theory in play?
I do see that, and I do hear that. I mean, there's the race for scale, like I mentioned before, to scale the business so that you can drive the costs down on the business. And at times there are defensive acquisitions as well.
We got to leave it there. Colin Whitmer, incredibly busy week. Wonderful to finish strong with you. Colin Whitmer with PwC and their deals leader as well. Lisa, we set up here, and you know, first of all, futures continue to advance, up 15, now up 22. Dow futures up 159. I mean, I guess we're not a one-day leap, Lisa, to a record high, but we're getting there.
Yeah, and the idea that's interesting to me is the data doesn't matter. The economic data, even though we see the virus spreading in Europe and frankly spreading in many places in the United States, people are mapping out a time beyond the pandemic. I am struck by the fact, how do we do this when so much of people's reticence to go out depends on the virus, not any official policy on not going out? How do we just sort of look past this, Tom?
On a Friday, remember, it's Friday evening on the Pacific Rim, if I get my time zones right. I got to think through that. But renminbi now breaching 7 solidly. We have a 6.6997 to 4 Roman numerals, 6.70 renminbi. I mean, it's amazing, Lisa, to see that Pacific Rim strength that China Beijing Leland Miller was talking about.
And Leland Miller also talking about at a certain point, the Chinese officials are not going to like this, especially given that some of the economic power that they've gotten has come from their exports, which have surged relative to imports, particularly with the U.S.
Well, John Farrow and I had a successful week boxing Lisa Abramowitz out. No talk of IG or high yield. Lisa, what did IG and high yield do this week?
They got huge inflows and they did very well.
They got money coming in.
Yes, absolutely. It was actually one of the biggest weeks in a long time for flows into these funds, and people looking at this as the alternative, a little bit of a cushion above rates given the fact that people are expecting inflation to pick up. Again, this all is predicated on the idea of recovery. and the idea that companies are going to be in much better shape come the next 6 months, 12 months.
Circle it all back to Benjamin Laidler over at Tower Hudson. He says the money's going out of equities. That was one of his insights here. Maybe it's all going into high yield. It has been an extraordinary week here. We're going to move the discussion forward, and so much of the discussion today will be on politics. Kevin Cirilli back in Washington, and David Weston, of course, at 12 noon, driving that conversation forward. And again, maybe possibly we'll hear from the two candidates through the day. On Bloomberg Markets this afternoon, Scott Minerd of Guggenheim. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Television. Good morning.
When everything around us, including the way we work and live, has been interrupted, uninterrupted service is peace of mind. Kimmy from customer support is responding to a 500% increase in daily call volume, no matter what. We keep on, so you can keep on.
The second half will be a lot stronger than the first half in China. We're heading to what we call the golden season of auto sales.
We are very confident, we're going to have another big growth, 2021 versus 2020.
We did not see people kind of holding back.
Chinese customers are into, right now, buying individual mobility.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
from London and New York for our audience worldwide. Good morning, good morning. The countdown to the Open starts right now. 30 minutes away from the opening bow with equity futures nicely positive, adding some weight to this week's rally. We're up 20 points. We advance 0.6%. And we begin with the big issue, playing fiscal headline roulette. The White House signaling openness to large-scale stimulus after Speaker Pelosi pushed back on individual measures.
We want to help the airline workers. There is legislation that we had in the CARES Act, which we hope that we could continue for another 6 months or so. That expired at the end of September. We can do that separately, but we cannot do it unless there's a big bill.
The president telling Fox Business that stimulus talks are starting to work out, saying, quote, "We started talking again, and we're talking about airlines, and we're talking about a bigger deal than airlines. We're talking about a deal with $1,200 per person. We're talking about other things. Leaving the on again, off again, on again. Talks, on again." But it's important to remember there are 3 players in these talks, and the final third has been relatively quiet for weeks now. Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell providing a reality check, speaking in Kentucky.
We do agree that another rescue package is needed. We have vast differences about how much we should spend. We've sort of agreed on the need. We haven't been able to agree on the amount. And I do believe that the reason for that is the proximity to the election.
Let's bring in Kevin Cirilli, shall we? Bloomberg chief Washington correspondent. He joins us now. Kevin, on again and off again, and they're on again. Have we gone anywhere this week?
You know, and I would add a fourth pillar to this, which is the private sector, which you've got airline CEOs now speaking out saying that they're going to have additional layoffs should Washington not get their act together. 2 things. First and foremost, I was having some conversations with some sources close to the president on the stimulus negotiations, and they said that the president's decision to withdraw from the stimulus in the tweet that caught Democrats and Republicans off guard earlier this week was really to suggest that airline package and airline relief would not be a definition of stimulus, meaning that if they do pass an airline package, that they could come back and pass additional relief in the lame duck or in the first quarter of next year. Secondly, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell now increasingly starting to talk more aggressively in these negotiations and put some pressure on Speaker Pelosi. And we should note, yesterday I spoke with a source who pointed out to me, it's not just Republicans that Speaker Pelosi is having to negotiate with, it's also centrist Democrats within her own party who are increasingly skeptical of the impact that this could have on down ballot races, and that her popularity could increase should she get to some type of deal. I thought you heard that in some of her rhetoric with David Weston yesterday, and I would anticipate that that continues. But they're very close to an airline stimulus package.
Kevin Cirilli, we hope so. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. A bit of a technical problem there, so we've got to let you go. Kevin, great to catch up, as always. Mohammed Al-Arian of Queen's College weighing in on the stimulus talks, tweeting the following. On the surface, the political debate on more fiscal relief has shifted to a piecemeal from a significantly more comprehensive approach. The key questions are, how many standalones? Is there enough congressional time given the SCOTUS issue and the macroeconomic impact? I'm pleased to say, like every Friday morning, for the last 9 months or so, Mohammed joins us now. Mohammed, fantastic to catch up with you, sir, as always. How do you read this game playing out down on Capitol Hill?
You know, it's total confusion. One day is this, one day is that, but the clock is ticking, and I think we have to realize the clock is ticking. John, someone described it to me as, in game theory terms, it's the prisoner's dilemma. You don't have enough trust, you don't have enough coordination, and therefore it's very difficult to get to an outcome. But it doesn't matter because the market will hear what it wants to hear, and right now this market wants to go higher.
Mohammed, what's the cheat guide to these talks right now? It just seems to me that the one thing that hasn't really changed is Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell hasn't really shown his hands whatsoever. He said repeatedly over the last several months they can't get a big package through the Senate. So what has actually changed if a key third of this negotiation hasn't really moved the dial?
Yeah, he's got to figure out what does it mean for individual Senate races that are close. So he's got a completely different political calculus that he has to take into account. And it's not clear at this point what the political implications for each party is. So this is a really complicated equation to solve, and you need something to force a solution. I can't quite see what it is, Jonathan.
Markets responded to this quite clearly. We've seen the long end of the yield curve start to push higher, 10s, 30s. Mohammed, markets will respond one way. Economic actors may not respond at all. Can you walk me through that distinction?
Yeah, you know, when it comes to markets, and particularly the equity market and risk markets, I think it's a simple story. Honestly, it's behavioral. It's to understand we are being driven by behavioral consideration, and we look for a narrative ex post. And I think the causality has been turned around. In terms of the economy, I think the evidence is overwhelming. And we got the evidence today again from the UK with a monthly GDP growth rate. And it's great to have monthly GDPs. Monthly GDP in August, half of what was expected. Throughout the advanced countries, the pace of economic recovery is slowing. And I can't think of any exception to that general statement when it comes to the systemically important advanced economies.
But can we talk about the United States with that in mind, Mohammed? One thing that you wrote about earlier this week was the risk that consumers would disengage, that companies might lose confidence. Any evidence of that right now?
Yeah, so if you look at the high frequency data that a lot of us look at, you start to see not just leveling off, but it's starting to head a little bit down. And that makes sense because cases are going up again. Now, the good news, and I think it is good news, the consequences of COVID so far appear to be less severe this time around. So hopefully you won't get as much of a pullback. Always remember this notion of human counterparty risk. It is critical. It's something that we don't understand fully, but it is something that is very much in play today around the world.
So many people have described the recovery that we're seeing as a K-shaped recovery, Mohammed, that the haves are doing better, that the have-nots are doing a whole lot worse. Can that carry on? Is that sustainable?
I mean, it is sustainable in terms of the economics. You're really asking a political and social question. But in terms of the economics, there's no reason why the strong doesn't get stronger and the weak doesn't get weaker. But that has massive implications going forward. But it is sustainable as long as politics or the street doesn't get in the way of it.
Well, one thing you said, Mohammed, several months ago on this program when you and I caught up, you were talking about the length of time we remain below capacity. The longer we are below potential, the lower potential might be in the future. How much damage is being done right now?
That's a lot, and it depends where you look. So in some countries, it's about scarring. So in the United States, it's about scarring, meaning that you lose some potential, but you haven't fundamentally altered your growth model in terms of its potency. If you go to some other countries, it's about the growth model, and that's a much more consequential issue. Your growth models becomes less and less relevant. So if you go to small open economies that depend on the global economy to turbocharge their growth, that growth model is becoming less and less potent. So it varies, but at the minimum, it's a scarring, but it is also much more consequential for some other countries.
Listen to the issues we're talking about. These are serious long-term economic issues, Mohammed, and yet markets and market participants are incredibly faithful in the belief that the Federal Reserve can keep financial conditions loose. Do you think they can? Is that really, to borrow your phrase, the only game in town right now, or is something else going on?
So I think it's yes to both. Yes, they will keep conditions very loose, and even if we get a fiscal stimulus, they're not going to step back. They're going to be pedal to the metal for a while. In terms of the second question, it's not just that, John. The behavioral aspects are really important. And we're not used to think about behavioral aspect. But increasingly, this market believes that there is no alternative to equities. Equities are your risk mitigator. Equities are your upside claim. Equities can do everything for you because everything else looks worse than equities. That's one. Two, it has worked. So there's a massive fear of missing out. And three, which is really, really, really important, is now the behavior happens very quickly. You buy the dip immediately. And then we look for a narrative that justifies why we've bounced up.
So, Mohammed, let's talk about that. It's price, then narrative, not narrative, then price. what we've seen shift over the last week, and radically so, is this fresh narrative of a blue wave. That's the reason we're starting to see Treasury yields higher, the reason you're starting to see an internal rotation in the equity market, or the reason people think you will in the foreseeable future over the long term. Mohammed, how vulnerable do you think that brand new narrative is, considering 2 weeks ago we were talking about a contested election and elevated volatility going into year end?
Yeah, and before that, we were talking about how a divided government is the best thing for the marketplace. So, that narrative evolves. Again, I think you're right, it's price. Then what follows is narrative. I think that if you think that the blue wave, should it materialize, is unambiguously good for markets, I don't think that's the case. I think it's unambiguously good for certain sectors, but certainly not for everything there. But John, again, we could talk about narratives till tomorrow morning. Ultimately, the causality, as you and I think, agree, is the other way around.
Mohammed Al-Arian, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. As always, the president of Queen's College, Cambridge. Thank you, sir. Good to catch up. Let's head to the market desk and get you some movers this morning. Ahead of the opening bell with futures positive, here's Abigail.
John, let's start out with this morning's top stock story, and that, of course, is AMD and Xilinx. We have the shares of Xilinx absolutely soaring on a report. The news that AMD is said to be in talks to buy Xilinx, its competitor, for about $30 billion. Now, Xilinx has a $25 billion enterprise, so that's a nice premium, and you do see those shares popping. And, of course, this could help AMD against their rival Intel. Gilead Sciences, the biotech giant, also popping higher, up 1.8%, as the company says that its phase 3 remdesivir study shows mortality reduction for hospitalized patients by 5 to 7 days, so a bright spot there. And then finally, GE up 5.7%, a new buy rating from Goldman Sachs, a $10 price target, suggesting some nice upside potential could be there. The analyst there saying that GE is the best self-help vaccine story across industrials. Investors liking that news on the morning. Again, sending the shares of GE higher, John.
Abigail, thank you. Coming up on this program, Fed officials putting the pressure on Washington to renew fiscal support. And that conversation coming up next with Amiga CEO Peter Cecchini. 18 minutes away from the opening bell. Equity futures shaping up as follows. A rally to end the week after a really nice week of gains on the S&P 500. This is Bloomberg.
Women leaders were actually better at controlling the deaths from COVID-19. Do you think out of this pandemic, we'll see more countries be willing to elect female leaders?
When we look at women leaders, we tend to project on them baggage that they shouldn't bear.
Women are given an opportunity when no one else wants to do the job.
Women had a very clear objective. They wanted to save lives.
The women leaders, if you look at their careers, have also built up a level of trust.
In fact, women have to be better at communication in order to be elected as leaders, whereas this doesn't hold true for men.
We need to get those sexist stereotypes out of our head and give women a fair run for leadership.
Trying to change the stereotypes about women is not only the business of women, but men have to be part of it.
We explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
I think the Fed can do more, and I'm sure we will look at all our options, but those aren't substitutes for fiscal policy. I right now would be hesitant to see us doing more in that area because I don't see the benefits. I could see how it would further add fuel to the financial markets. I'm more skeptical how much it would help the real economy.
Dallas Fed President Robert Kaplan applying pressure on Washington, D.C. to reach an agreement on another stimulus package. Bloomberg International economics and policy correspondent Mike McKee joins us now for more. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, John. That is a fairly widespread view at the Fed these days. We had Eric Rosengren of the Boston Fed saying much the same thing yesterday. The problem, and I've been banging on about this for a long time, and I've asked Chairman Jay Powell several times about it, is that the Fed raises or lowers interest rates. That's their tool. That's their job. And on the margin, maybe that boosts stocks, but the upper 10% of Americans by income own 88% of the stocks. So it really doesn't help the people who've been affected by the virus. Maybe if they can generate inflation, they can lower real rates some more. But is there any real demand for lending? And so right now, at this point, what's the point is what these Fed officials are saying. The effective Fed funds rate is 8 basis points. If you've ruled out negative rates, and they have, you can't get much lower. You take a look now at the level of yields for 2-year and 10 years. When you put in a term premium, you're not going to be able to lower that much more. You can get it down a little bit, but the spread's only about 20 basis points. Now, you can term out. You can buy more at the long end, but with the spread that low, do you really make a difference? Suppose you do want to, and you're able to flatten and lower the curve. Do you get anything out of it? Well, take a look at this. Mortgage rates are at record lows. We know that, and the housing industry has been doing very, very well. But look at the other line there. Mortgage credit availability is falling. Banks, this is going to be interesting for you to talk about with the earnings next week, are pulling back from mortgage lending as the threat of defaults and foreclosures rise with the economy slowing. Meanwhile, companies borrowed a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, and right now demand for corporate loans is falling significantly. So the Fed has tools, yes, but they use them to raise or lower rates, and loan demand is falling, so there doesn't seem to be a credit cost problem in the economy. They know it, the market knows it, and now they're talking about it.
A huge dependence on the Federal Reserve. Shock horror. Mike McKee, great to catch up, sir. Alpha Amigo's Peter Cicchini discussing the negative impact of low Treasury yields, saying, quote, low rates can't support ever-rising equity prices when cash flows remain challenged or are contracting and credit quality continues to deteriorate. Peter joins us right now. Now, Peter Cicchini, this was a story in Japan. In Europe, you can do as much QE as you like sometimes. Sometimes the equity market just can't catch a bid. Are you expecting something similar in the United States?
In fact, I am. And believe it or not, Jonathan, we've known each other a while now. I really am an optimist by nature. But in situations like this, and you were speaking of it earlier with Tom Keene, it's been a bizarre week, and I think markets have been behaving equally as bizarrely, trading up ex post, as Mohammed was saying, on very, very flimsy narratives. When you look at low rates, and to Mike McKee's point just now, the Fed acts through a rate mechanism. It is not a quantity. Japan shows us unequivocally that that does not necessarily mean that equities will catch a bid, and it does not necessarily mean that the economy can avoid recession. If we look at Japan since 2008, they've been in and out of recession serially. And when you look at their PE ratios, they traded a discount to the S&P 500 in their broad indices.
You mentioned this market narrative, and I'll ask every single guest on this program this question today. How vulnerable you think this new market narrative is, that this market and market participants are gripping tightly hold of?
Yeah, look, I just came out with a piece called Nonsense Narratives, and much more kindly, less kindly phrased than I think Mohammed said it. But this narrative that a Biden victory is going to somehow result in a larger stimulus package, which is unequivocally good for the economy, I think is probably not correct. When we think about the narrative coming into the 2016 election, it was quite the opposite. It was, well, President Trump was going to come in and he was going to lower corporate taxes, which he did. He was going to have more regulatory friendly policies, which he did. What is the offset to a potentially larger stimulus package on a Biden victory? Well, it's going to be higher taxes. And by the way, that happens whether there's blue or red in the White House, because fiscal deficits are at $3 trillion year to date. It's enormous. Where U.S. GDP, debt to GDP, is at 130%, an unthinkable level just a few years ago. So taxes will and must go up at some point, because I do not believe we can forever rely on the Fed to monetize all of our Treasury issuance. It creates incredible moral hazard, and I think risks, frankly, fundamentally to our democracy.
Ultimately, for now, it's going to be a policy choice, Peter, before the market tests this administration or the next administration or the one after that anytime soon. My question to you, and you've touched on the issue for me through much of this week, we've talked so much about fiscal stimulus, but very little about a corporate tax hike. And I'm just wondering how you pushed through the potential for that. Senator Harris was talking about it in the debate. Wasn't hidden. We'll undo day one what they did with that tax cut, with the exception of people who earn under $400,000. That's the income tax story. Talk to me about the corporate tax story.
Yeah, well, certainly corporate taxes will go at least back up to 28%, and frankly could go much higher. I mean, the deficit holes that we're looking at right now are enormous for the foreseeable future. And again, I do believe that, you know, it is fundamental to capitalist democracy that we have a legislature that is designed to decide what spending is worthwhile based on what the people believe they can tolerate in terms of taxes. Otherwise, it leads to a situation where the Monetary Policy Authority can simply monetize everything, really leading to a tax and spend situation that's no longer, half of that equation is no longer driven by Congress, but by an unelected central banking authority. And that, to me, is an unsustainable outcome for our democracy. So taxes must rise. That's obviously quite fluid as to how much they will rise, but certainly no one is talking about that half of the equation. They're speaking simply to the larger fiscal stimulus package, which, again, I believe is necessary, but that package will not offset the longer-term consequences of higher taxation.
Yeah. Peter, final question from me. Got to get a trade from you for the next month. If you disagree with a lot of what you're hearing on programs like this over the last week or so, what is the trade for you?
Well, look, Mike touched on it. You touched on it on the outset of this Q&A, which is that, you know, rates are extremely low. I have liked gold for some time. I will continue to like gold for as long as we are near the zero bound, because I think it is an important substitute for treasuries with rates as low as they are. And as I've mentioned, I also don't mind being long the dollar, because I think these narratives are going to fall to pieces. There will be a risk off, and there will be a flight to dollar assets on safety.
And you will be back on the program to talk about whether that happens or not. Peter Cecchini, great to catch up, sir, as always. Coming up on the program, the analyst action you need to know. That'll be next in our morning calls, and later around the opening bell. JP Morgan's Monica DeCenso. Looking forward to that in just a moment. 7 minutes away, equity futures bid up 0.6%. This is Bloomberg.
Ada 3 kelompok pengungsi tersebut yang sudah berpencar arah. Kemudian kami dari Polsek Banda Sakti berkoordinasi dengan perangkat desa Kampung Jomblang melakukan upaya pengumpulan secara persuasif serta minta tolong kepada warga. Alhamdulillah warga yang terpecah semuanya berkumpul.
I think what we've seen during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
Five minutes away from the opening bell, equity futures with a nice little lift, up 20 points on the S&P 500. Time now for some morning calls. A look at some of the analyst recommendations on Wall Street this morning. Your first call from Susquehanna downgrading American Express to neutral, 110 price target. The analyst expecting results to fall short of consensus growth estimates. Next up, Goldman resuming coverage of GE with a buy, a $10 price target. The analyst seeing upside of at least 50%, citing good progress under new CEO Larry Culp. And finally, Stifel downgrading VF Corp to a hold, $80 price target. The analyst citing limited long-term growth potential and an appropriate valuation. Through the calls behind us, the opening bell just ahead. Investors starting to envision a market under a Biden presidency. We'll have that conversation with JP Morgan's Monica DeCenso. 4 minutes out from the cash open, equities up. This is Bloomberg.
When opportunity knocks at the door, don't say, blimey, I've still got my pajamas on. Say yes to stuff and it will take you interesting places.
We're clearly going through some very unusual times and, enormous difficulties getting groups of people to agree on things.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in the City of London, join us on Leaders with Lacqua.
As the 2020 presidential race comes down to the wire, the outcome may hinge on a few key states. I'm David Weston. Join me for a swing state special focusing on Arizona, North Carolina, and Ohio this weekend on Bloomberg Television.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Another couple of weeks that have felt like a couple of years in the equity market. 2 weeks of gains potentially. Up 18 on the S&P 500, advanced in 0.5%, up 3% almost on the week. We're doing nicely here on the Nasdaq. Up 64, up another 0.6%. That's your equity market. That's your opening bell. Switch up the board. In the bond market, we look a little something like this on treasuries. Yields unchanged, all the 7s, 0.777% on a 10-year, briefly. Euro dollar, 118.14, down around about 0.5%. For the US dollar, up about 0.5% for euro against the dollar. Euro dollar 118.14 there. And in the commodity market, coming in about 0.5%, call it 0.4, 41 handle on WTI. That's the cross-asset picture. Another week of gains on the card with your movers at the market desk. Here's Abigail.
John, let's start out with some of the key mega cap tech and internet names that are helping the markets climb higher on this Friday and on pace for that big second up week in a row. Amazon is popping up about 0.4% as Mizuho has raised their price target to $4,000 per share on a potential third quarter beat. And that price target does imply that more than 20% upside is possible. Microsoft is higher amid a report that they may be considering allowing workers to work from home permanently. Perhaps a trend will be set there. Qualcomm's price target raised at Evercore ISI. The analyst saying that they are likely to benefit from Apple's 5G ramp up, and Tesla higher for a second day in a row. Now, where we see a real bid, John, is in the healthcare space, even though that sector overall up about 0.5%. But HCA Holdings, Tenet Healthcare, Universal Health, the hospital stocks higher as HCA Holdings has pre-announced to the upside. Analysts are encouraged also by the fact that their EBITDA beat, even if you don't include the emergency aid. So we do see a very solid rally here for these hospital stocks. Let's see if it continues and if it can help the healthcare sector go a bit higher on the day. Energy, as you know, the top sector right now, John, up 0.9%.
Abigail, thank you. Thank you very much. 1 minute and about 40 seconds into the session. Energy higher, up 0.9%. Materials, industrials, we're seeing this story all over again. The S&P 500 advancing 0.5%. Abigail mentioning Microsoft. A permanent shift to work from home if you want to. If you want to is the key part of this. Remember the unlimited vacation some of the tech firms would offer employees, and then there was a competition for who didn't take vacation. That's where the problems begin. We can talk about that another time. Global equities headed for their best week again since July. Investors growing increasingly confident of a Joe Biden presidency.
The prospect of a Biden victory, and I think a sweep. Biden, to me, is both positive for the S&P and for Asian assets.
This is very much a blue wave, massive stimulus type of trade.
You have calmer geopolitics, and of course, if this is a Biden victory with the sweep, you're going to have much more domestic stimulus.
There's more comfort in the market with a Biden wave.
The price action across markets this morning is very suggestive to me of the sweep.
How misplaced is that comfort? Scarlett Fu joins us now with more. Hey, Scarlett.
Hey, John. Yeah, let's start with China, whose markets last traded before today back in September. And think of all the things that have happened since then. Of course, you've got President Trump's COVID diagnosis, the Biden wave, as your guest talked about, and multiple about-faces on fiscal stimulus. None of that phased Chinese markets. Stocks and the renminbi posted gains as they resumed trading. And if anything, the thinking is a second Trump term would mean more of the same Beijing-Washington tensions, while a Biden administration could potentially calm relations. And for now, the fundamentals favor China. Industrial profits are rebounding, and the latest Taixing Services PMI show that the economy is recovering and moving past the pandemic. By contrast, you look at the latest U.S. jobs report, which shows the labor market is struggling and we have a slowing recovery. Now, U.S. stocks are still the world leaders here this year, but with Asian stocks also back above their pre-pandemic level, there is some talk that it's time to rotate to Asian equities. Certain EM currencies are also set to outperform if you get a Biden victory. 4 years ago, investors were buying the ruble and selling the Mexican peso because then candidate Trump was favorable on Russia while threatening to cut ties with Mexico. That trade is moving in the other direction now. And Paul McNamara of GAM says that a Biden victory would mean a return to a rules-based global trade regime, which would benefit, say, the Chinese yuan and the Mexican peso. The ruble, if you look at it, is down about 8% versus the dollar in the past 3 months. A Democrat in the White House, the thinking goes, would likely impose harsher trade sanctions on Russia. John?
Scarlett Fu, thank you. Let's continue the conversation. JP Morgan's Monica DeCenso saying global equities are positioned to gain from a Biden victory, writing, quote, if Biden wins, he will inherit a challenged economy, but he'll combat that with continued stimulus, and it's unlikely that he'll engage in near-term tariff and trade wars. Global equities appear poised to continue benefiting. Monica, I'm pleased to say, joins us now over the phone. Monica, this is an important distinction that you're making, the presidency versus a blue wave. What the presidency could mean for international equities. Let's start there, Monica. Just build on that for us.
Sure. I will say, and your previous guest mentioned it as well, it does appear increasingly likely that we see a blue wave. And I think that is what the market is pricing in right now when you see equities continue to move, because if you only have a Biden win without, say, the Senate moving, it'll be harder for him to get more of the stimulus done. That is the underpinning of my view that you continue to see U.S. equities outperform, as well as global equities as well. So I really do think you probably need the blue wave for the real bullish outcome that many people are talking about to come to fruition.
Do you need the blue wave for the international piece of your call to work, Monica? The long China story, the long China currency story that I've heard from John Norman a little bit earlier on this morning. Do you need the blue wave for that to work?
We have been bullish EM currencies, and our view is that you probably see the dollar weaken actually under either administration. And the reason there is, interestingly, whether Trump wins or Biden wins, you likely see continued deficit spending. And that will have a long-term impact on the dollar that could benefit other currencies like China. Again, if you do get the blue wave, I think that argues for that even more, because you see more stimulus spending and you probably see less of the rhetoric and noise between the U.S. and China, maybe a little more tension with Russia. But I think you're going to see a U.S. that's moving more in lockstep with many other major countries. I think that's going to be constructive for equities. Remember what Biden did with Obama back during the last crisis. We saw a lot of stimulus spending. And I think that's what we're going to have happen again for the U.S. to come out of this.
This pendulum has swung so quickly. The mood of this market just a couple of weeks ago, Monica, was about a contested election and elevated volatility into year-end. Monica, what changed for you?
It's fascinating. Actually, at the beginning of the year, I was meeting with a lot of clients, and if you told people, not only do I think Biden will win, but that you'll see a blue wave, most people would have assumed the market would sell off in that scenario, because they would have been worried about rolling back of tax cuts and what that means for corporate earnings. Fast forward 9 months, because of the impact of COVID, it's just unlikely that a blue wave has the same implications it would have before this happened, because again, you're inheriting a more challenged economy, and so stimulus spending is probably what happens. Rates remain low for a very long time. That's a perfect backdrop for equities over the near to intermediate term. And so I think a lot of that is what's changed. Obviously, you've also had polls move. And I do want to caution you, we're still weeks away from the election, so this could change.
Yep.
Nothing is certain. And while volatility has come in, the market is still pricing in heightened volatility between now and the election, calling for average moves of 2% a day. We haven't seen those kind of moves lately. So the market clearly thinks there could be some other noise before this is said and done.
Would you fade that volatility, Monica?
I would, because I think, again, very hard to trust the polls, but we've been engaging in strategies that are selling that volatility to find a way to monetize it. I just don't think that you're going to see volatility realized the same way the market is expecting right now.
Just want to finish up with something you touched on at the start of the year in the conversations you had. Rolling back the tax cuts is still the plan. So, Monica, why is no one worried about it now?
It's funny. I think the view is, while you have that, and that is a negative for earnings growth for the next couple of years, it is offset with the benefit of stimulus spending. And so I think that's where you get into a more nuanced view, certainly of U.S. equities, where you should focus on sectors that would benefit from the stimulus spending and just stimulating the economy in general, that might offset some of the impact of the rollback of tax cuts.
Where do you end up if you look for that?
You're probably going to look pro-cyclical, right? So you should be looking at industrials. They've outperformed the last few months. They probably continue to outperform. And then I still love areas like healthcare. I mean, you've seen all the headlines recently with all the moves towards vaccines and different treatments. And this is a sector that tends to be defensive and is innovating at the same time. And you have reasonable valuations with many large-cap healthcare companies. You get dividends. It's a great place to hide if you're a little worried but want some leverage to the innovation story.
Monica, lucky to catch up with you today. Got to get you back on the program soon. Don't be a stranger. Monica DeCenso there of JP Morgan. Let's get to the market desk, shall we, and get you some movers. Here's Abigail.
John, let's check out some of the movers well beneath the surface, starting out with the shares of Wayfair. They are popping higher. This is William Blair has upgraded the stock to an outperform. They also have a price target that is higher. This, of course, on the company benefiting from this year's pandemic trends. This stock now up more than 230% on the year. Zoom is sharply higher. higher, up 3.3%, getting a street high price target of $550 for Mizuho. This, of course, before the analyst day next week. And it's very clear at this point, John, that Zoom is not just a fad, but here to stay as this pandemic has really shifted trends. And then rocket companies up 2.3%. JP Morgan upgrading to an overweight from a neutral, setting a price target of nearly $29 per share. They see relative upside for the tech-driven real estate transaction company. And then, John, very quickly on this day's big stock story, Xilinx heading to its best day since January of 2019 on the possibility that AMD may buy its rival for $30 billion in a bid to help AMD beat its other rival, Intel. Lots of competition in that chip sector, and the stocks right now outperforming in a big way, up 1.8%, being helped out by Xilinx, John.
Abigail, thank you. Thank you very much. Coming up on this program, Europe stepping up efforts to force tougher restrictions amid a resurgence in virus cases. That conversation coming up next with Morgan Stanley's Sri Sarkaran. From London and New York, this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
They've moved the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
Could be on course to close out the week with a day of gains this Friday morning. We advance around about 0.6%, 13 minutes into the session, up around about 0.75% on the Nasdaq, doing nicely on the session and on the week as well. Over in Europe, stocks climbing as well, despite ramping up restrictions to limit the spread of the coronavirus. Spain declaring a state of emergency in Madrid. German Chancellor Angela Merkel weighing new curbs on the country's biggest cities, and new restrictions in the UK, potentially closing restaurants and bars, could be announced as soon as Monday. With your latest wrap from the continent, Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo joins us from Brussels. Hi, Maria.
Well, Jonathan, yesterday we talked about how new restrictions were coming, and today they are official. Spain has put in the city of Madrid into a state of emergency. That's going to be the case for the next 15 days. When you look at France, it has its three biggest cities now under major restrictions. And Angela Merkel, who was just speaking, saying that the next few days will be crucial to determine whether or not the second wave of infections can be curtailed and can be suppressed. What is interesting here, and it really caught my eye, is that if you look at the action in the market, when you look at stocks, when you look at bonds, there has been a rally and an outperformance of periphery bonds being led by Spain. You would think on a day like today, the Spanish 10-year would be under pressure, but it's not been the case. And this points to two very different dynamics. On the ground, we're looking at the infection rate, but when you look at what the market is looking at, well, they anticipate that one way or another, there is going to be more stimulus. They anticipate that the European Central Bank is also going to have to take measures come December. And they also look at this and say, you know, for the time being, central governments and governments across Europe are sticking to their words. We're not going to see a national lockdown. This is very targeted. This is very regional, even though we are seeing the numbers go up. So it's a very different dynamic when you look at the numbers, when you look at hospitals, and when you look at the market action happening in Europe today.
Maria, thank you. Dare I say the Spanish and Italian bond market starting to behave like a sovereign debt market. Again, it's taken a while. Morgan Stanley, Sri Sankaran saying the rising case count in Europe is concerning, saying, quote, it could dampen the economic recovery, but it seems likely the amount of liquidity on the sidelines is reflected in the market's willingness to look through a short pause in the V. I'm pleased to say that Sri joins us now on the phone. Sri, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. Let's just start with a very basic question. The outlook for credit right now on the continent, is it driven by the ECB or the fundamentals on the ground?
I think it's very much, thanks for having me, John. So, yeah, the market price action very much driven by technicals. As Maria pointed out earlier, in the sovereign bond markets, you see that in credit markets, it's a theme of compression that's playing out even in Europe. So the message here would be that, yes, the fundamentals do matter, but the thought process of the market seems to be that they're willing to look through the near-term deterioration in fundamentals, because in the back half of it, it is going to be an environment where rates are lower for longer. There is enough of fiscal and monetary stimulus. And particularly in the case of Europe, I mean, you do get the expectation that the PEP package is going to be scaled up going into the end of this year. Our economists also brought it forward from early next year. And at the same time, from the fiscal side, it does translate into more impetus for some degree of collaboration. And to that extent, all this is translating into this compression dynamic and peripheral bonds behaving more like sovereign bonds, as you mentioned, and also within credit, some of the weaker portions of the market trying to kind of pick a bit now.
Sri, you mentioned fiscal policy. Let's just touch on that briefly. It's clear to me in the last several months that we've drained away some of the redenomination risk in the sovereign debt market. You mentioned the periphery, Greece, Italy, Spain. Times in a market where typically over the last several years, the last decade, when there was stress, we'd expect those markets to sell off. They're not anymore. If that part of the sovereign debt market is starting to act like a sovereign credit and not just a credit, Sri, do you see any of that being reflected in some of the domestic markets in corporate credit, now that the sovereigns are starting to look like sovereigns again, at least for the time being?
Yeah, so I think the whole corporate bond purchase program, that took away some of this peripheral premium within the corporate bond market. So in this leg of this rally or compression theme, it's much more about credit quality, and that has been the case since the ECB started its corporate bond purchase program. So I do look at that as the pivotal point with respect to when corporate credit markets started focusing less on the sovereign risk and the peripheral risk, but more on the fundamental dynamics and the technicals of the purchase. And at the end of the day, I mean, the ECB purchase programs and the overall dynamic around money on the sidelines does translate into a very strong technical dynamic, and that's kind of what's driving this compression dynamic, rather than one where corporate bond markets, yes, they do focus on fundamentals, but it's not really about the sovereign risk as such. And arguably, if peripheral government bonds also lose some of that peripheral premium, you should see the case for corporate bonds, particularly high yields, start to pick up even more.
I just wonder, Sri, what the trade is then as I look into corporates. Is there something to look at in the bank sector, in the financial sector?
Yeah, I mean, we're still kind of comfortable with the credit portion of the market. Preferences for staying down in quality within the non-financial component. We do have a preference for financials over non-financials across both U.S. and Europe. And at the end of the day, I mean, the down in quality view is driven by the expectation that looking through the near-term concerns, it's the reflation dynamic that's going to anchor markets. And to that extent, it does make more sense to take on credit risk by going down the quality spectrum rather than going out the duration curve. That's probably more true in the U.S., but the near term, the magnitude of the rally that we have seen in Europe has been a bit more muted than what we had in our forecast. So there is a bit more upside on the European credit leg of the story. And within that, we still maintain a down in quality bias, and we would kind of own financials over non-financials.
Well, Sri, it's the reflation trade in Europe I wanted to get to. I think, including Morgan Stanley, the trade at the moment for many people seems to be short treasuries, long bunds, reflation being a much more prominent theme in the United States than, say, in Europe at the moment. And the bund market and the way that's priced right now really speaks to that. Sri, reflation in Europe, can you speak to that a little bit? Where's the hope come from?
So to be clear, our economist Jacob Nell and team, they do think that, one, with respect to the growth dynamic, the lag between U.S. and Europe is going to be much shorter this time around than the financial crisis. The initial leg of the recovery has been stronger in the U.S. because the Fed had much more kind of power to cut rates than the ECB. And even on the fiscal side, there was more stronger response initially from the U.S. But now that those actions have normalized, on a looking forward basis, they think Europe comes back to this pre-COVID levels of output by the early part of 2022. For the U.S., it's middle of 2021, so that's almost like a 2-quarter lag versus the 5-year differential that we saw for Europe to recover versus the U.S. And the optimism is in part driven by the aspect of the next leg of it could have been sovereign concerns and so on, and that's no longer the case. And the policy response has been pretty strong, and corporate credit is a part of the overall playbook as well. So the bottom line here is that inflation probably doesn't normalize as quickly in Europe, but at least the growth narrative doesn't lag too much, and that's kind of contributing to some degree of optimism even on the inflation front.
Sri, I could talk to you all day. I've just got one final question, if we can put a bow on it, if we can. We had the income shock. It wasn't an income crisis because fiscal stepped in. One thing we haven't had that I think some people are surprised at is the balance sheet issue, where you start to see the C-suite really take a hold of things and start to deleverage. Where's the deleveraging, Sri? It's been an odd economic downturn without it. In fact, people have leveraged up. They've taken on more debt. What's going on?
Yeah, that is an important debate, and that could go on for another show altogether. But the message there is that for now, the C-suite or corporates in general are still focused on shoring up liquidity. So what you see is cash-to-debt ratios continue to improve across the board and across the quality spectrum and across regions on the corporate balance sheet side. It does translate into very high degrees of gross leverage, but the increase in net leverage has not been as damaging. I think the next leg of it, which is what we're framing as the early cycle playbook, is that once you get this involuntary re-leveraging, you do get the focus to bring down the corporate debt balances and so on, and that leg of it is going to happen. We see that happening in the early part of next year. Once the recovery momentum gathers and companies are more convinced that they have enough liquidity buffers, that's when they'll start using that to bring down quantum of debt and to improve their credit metrics. I think we're a little too early to see signals of fundamental improvement.
We can have a whole conversation about this the next time you come on. I promise you, Sri. Great to catch up. Really, really smart. Sri Sankaran there on the latest in the credit market in both Europe and the United States. In this market, equities up with a sector price action. Here's Abigail.
John, we are looking at mildly risk-on action here sector-wise with the markets higher. If we use the IMAP and the Bloomberg terminal, you will see most sectors are higher for the S&P 500, most of them by more than 0.5% at this point, led by tech. Now, on the week, it's super interesting. What we're looking at here is energy on top, then materials, utilities, even with yields higher, those utility dividend stocks are also higher, and then the industrial. So nice cyclical tilt on the week with the S&P 500 heading to its best week since July 3rd, John.
Abigail, thank you. Coming up next, the market moving events you need to be watching. That'll be next in our trading diary. From London and New York, this is Bloomberg.
to That's Debatable, an interactive series on today's most pressing issues. The resolution this time, is it time to redistribute the wealth? Two perspectives.
Pointing to billionaires and saying we should take their money away is ineffective political strategy.
We have a choice in this country, either great wealth in the hands of a few or a democracy.
I'm John Donvan. Join us for That's Debatable, presented by Bloomberg and Intelligence Squared, Friday at 7 p.m.
Particularly, sort of the technology landscape have gotten to some pretty extraordinary levels. So I think it's not a surprise. I don't think it's any indication of the beginning of the end, but I do think markets don't like uncertainty.
"25 minutes into the session, equity markets just trimming some of the gains, up about 0.5% on the S&P 500. Your trading diary, what you need to be watching through next week into the weekend and coming out the other side. The US bond market closing on Monday for the Columbus Day holiday. We get US CPI on Tuesday, plus big bank earnings kicking off with JP Morgan and Citigroup reporting before the opening bell. Then it's Bank of America, Goldman Sachs reporting on Wednesday, plus we get US PPI and Fed Vice Chairman Richard Clarida will be speaking. Morgan Stanley reporting on Thursday, plus another round of initial jobless claims. And finally on Friday, we get US retail sales. That's the data for the week ahead from London and New York. That does it for me. For our audience worldwide, this was the countdown to the open. Continue the conversation at Twitter at Ferro TV, with an equity market playing fiscal headline roulette going into the weekend. This is Bloomberg.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. Experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored island-wide. Much of the blame has been placed on FEMA for a slow response in comparison to recent disasters on the mainland. But recovery from a disaster of this complexity and scale has proven more challenging than anyone anticipated. And filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan, and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's most isolated and vulnerable residents. Steve Berenbaum is one of Anderson's business associates. He offered an extra car and a set of hands.
So we received an initial report from a nurse that was out in the area. We're headed to the northeast region of Utuado for some people that are in need of urgent medical assistance.
Dr. Sally Priester is a physician from San Juan. She filled a van with medical supplies at her own expense and brought along a team of nurses. Google Maps estimated our first destination to be a 90-minute drive. But it didn't account for obstacles like this. Our first stop was the home of an 82-year-old blind Vietnam veteran. His roof was blown off by the storm, and he's been living alone in a back shed for nearly 2 months.
His cane actually got broken in the storm, so he's limited mobility. He has a number of medical ailments. Dr. Priester's having a look at him. We called the VA. They're going to get him set up with what he needs, get him stabilized so he can then be transported either to an evacuation center or off the island. It's when the chain gets broken, when those families that are connected to them leave the island or take off. These guys get left at the end of the road, and it's tough.
FEMA was not officially part of Robert's team, and their arrival caught everyone by surprise. Their job here was to survey and report back to their superiors, and did not come with medical aid of any kind.
People think that FEMA is there to hand out bottles of water. It's not what they do. FEMA has a role to play. They have a very specific role. They bring in ships, they bring in airplanes, they bring in tractor trailers with pallets of things. But they're a big machine, and there's gaps in that thing. And you're seeing one of the gaps here, and we help fill that role. These guys are in a bad situation before, and now they're struggling for real basic things. One of the risks that you run is people going from fear to hopelessness. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach.
And how are they reached? How are they even found?
Word of mouth, mostly.
And what's your role in all this?
Ghost in the machine. I'm lucky enough to be able to communicate with folks in FEMA, the state of Puerto Rico.
For a ghost, Robert makes his presence well known. Not only was he the de facto leader of the mission, now with FEMA in tow, he created his own maps to survey storm damage.
So we're right here.
And delivered them to FEMA HQ free of charge.
I have pretty good reach.
Perhaps that's how he managed to earn himself a coveted FEMA badge without actually working for them. And it's these relationships that allow him to operate more efficiently than an NGO or a government agency.
We're able to resolve problems at a different level.
next stop was on a mountaintop, a family of 11 struggling to care for their special needs brother in what was left of their house.
Probably we are the first health team to come and visit this family.
Muy bien, todo muy bien.
The patient has Down syndrome. He is all day in bed. The difficulty with this is the patient cannot be alone. The most important thing is that you need to take care of the chronic disease besides disability, because they have been not going to a doctor, and no doctor has coming here yet.
So we need a refill of this medication.
After maybe 54 days, it's not getting better. And the only way that you can be able to see that is coming to the ground, drive, and see the people and talk to the people.
You can see San Juan from here, but you can't get there. It's like the Emerald City.
On this stop, we caught word that a man living alone at the edge of the jungle was in need of care.
So we decided to take a little detour, come up here and check out and see what's going on. One of the challenges is to find those people that are at the end of these roads that need help.
¿Pero por qué estás solo? ¿Por qué estás por acá tan solo? I'm asking about why he's alone right here. He said things of life happens. Yeah, I'm here by myself. So ¿dónde vive acá? En la parte de... This is not a job. To do this, you need to have passion for what you can do. You're not going to get paid.
It's said in disaster response and emergency response that the real first responders are your neighbors. You don't need to wait for a lucrative FEMA contract to go out and do good and to help the community.
And do you feel like you're making a difference?
Lives you touch and people that you can affect. I don't really think about it in those terms.
But why do you do it?
It helps me sleep at night. I think it's as much for the people that are going out to help and do things as it is for the people that you affect.
Whether out of altruism, or the lure of a paid gig, or some mixture of the two, Anderson hopes to stay here to help shape Puerto Rico's future.
Puerto Rico's essentially been a colony for 400 years. It was treated poorly by the Spanish. It was not treated well by the United States when they first got here. Puerto Rico can continue in the way that it's always been, or Puerto Rico can rebuild itself like nothing that's ever been. And we have to do everything we can to make that real. That's the bottom line.
When I met him first online, I found him to be really sweet. I think I was the one who was talking for an hour. He was just listening.
When we met, I saw her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, which was, something that I was looking for.
Anshu and Sumit are one of about 12 million couples that get married in India every year. Unlike their parents' generation, they're not from two close villages, but from two cities on opposite sides of the country. And their love didn't start through community matchmaking, marriage brokers, or classified ads in newspapers, but began online.
So we met through jeevansati.com. So it's basically an online portal where we have detailed profile of different grooms and brides.
It makes a lot of remote profiles who are located in distant areas more accessible.
Thanks to growing internet and smartphone usage, matrimony websites and apps in India are starting to disrupt the matchmaking industry. More and more people are finding their partners at the click of a mouse. jeevansati.com, where Anshu and Sumit met, is one of the biggest players. Young Indians looking for love set up profiles including their caste and horoscope, but their criteria for choosing spouses appears to be changing.
We have seen the shift from, traditional caste community conservative parameters to something like which is more focused on education, employment.
Anshu and Sumit's marriage was initiated by their parents, but modern Indian couples like them have more input than previous generations.
We looked up to them to agree for the proposal, but it was primarily our decision that we wanted to be with each other.
So what's the emoji you use the most to send to each other?
There's a bear, which basically we use for indicating a hug.
Yeah, that's our language basically. Bear icon for a hug.
Time flies when you're in love, and just 1.5 months after they first met online, the couple got engaged. They decided to hold their wedding less than 3 months later. But planning a traditional Hindu wedding on such short notice is no easy task. The massive event usually lasts 3 days, has various ceremonies and celebrations, and involves the entire two families and hundreds of guests. Luckily, there are websites and apps for that.
We searched online, we got in touch with Wedding Brigade, and they helped us finalize the venue. And it makes the search faster and efficient.
Startups like the Wedding Brigade are challenging traditional wedding planners in this $50 billion industry. It provides various services from booking banquet venues to buying wedding gowns. The website makes money by charging commission from vendors.
People don't want to be limited to what is available around them. They want to know the entire range of options available before making a decision. And now it's easy to find almost everything on one portal.
Anshu and Sumit are officially married in a ritual that has gone on for thousands of years, but their love started in a very new way. Technologies might be changing the way couples meet, date, and get married in India, but they're definitely not changing everything.
The technology was only the first level help that we could get to find each other. Everything else was like very humanly and emotions and feelings based.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become a symbol of everything the Republican Party stands against.
Everyone gets a right to basic health care. We need strong oversight of these banks.
A legal scholar and a consumer advocate turned politician, Warren has branded herself as a champion of the working class and made a career out of standing up to big business. While rumors of a 2020 presidency bid remain just that,
I'm not running for president.
her Senate seat is up for re-election in 2018, and Republicans are already pumping millions into super PACs to defeat her. This is the story of how a law professor and politician came to be seen as the biggest threat to Republican values and the greatest hope for progressive America. Elizabeth Warren was born Elizabeth Ann Herron, the youngest of 3 siblings, on June 22, 1949, in Oklahoma City to middle-class parents. After waiting tables to help her family pay the bills, Warren became a star on the high school debate team. She landed a scholarship to George Washington University at the age of 16, but 2 years later dropped out to marry her high school sweetheart, Jim Warren. By 1980, Warren was a mother of 2, divorced and remarried, had earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, a juris degree from Rutgers, and practicing law in New Jersey. Warren then went on to become an influential law professor, teaching, lecturing, and publishing highly cited work on bankruptcy and commercial law at 7 universities around the country, eventually settling at Harvard Law School. But Warren wasn't always a liberal lion.
Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican, actually.
That's Stephen Dennis.
I'm a Senate reporter for Bloomberg. Around the time that Elizabeth Warren switched parties, she became a fierce opponent of a Republican drive to make it much harder to file for bankruptcy. She fought that for a decade. It ended up passing anyways.
While her efforts ultimately failed, her warning calls were heard in 2008.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Our entire economy is in danger, and without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold.
Professor Warren was tapped to help with oversight in the government bailout.
She would excoriate bankers and their bonuses and their practices.
Why should the U.S. taxpayer alone carry Citi?
She proposed a series of tough regulations, which became the basis for much of the Dodd-Frank financial law that we have today. That sort of catapulted her to national stardom, particularly among the progressive left.
Encouraged by her newfound notoriety, Warren declared her bid for the U.S. Senate on September 14, 2011. During the race, her opponent Scott Brown tried to derail Warren by accusing her of falsely claiming Native American heritage, a controversy that earned her the nickname Pocahontas. Nevertheless, she was victorious and won the Senate seat by a comfortable margin. She used her new tenure to challenge everyone, from banking regulators and Treasury officials to members of Wall Street and Congress.
I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable. No one should be above the law.
She called for Wells Fargo CEO John Stump to resign for fraud, introduced the Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, and reintroduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. In 2016, after staying silent during the Democratic primary battle, Warren finally endorsed Hillary Clinton and had some harsh words for candidate Trump.
Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone, and that is just one of the many reasons he will never be president of the United States.
But she was wrong.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Warren wasted no time resisting Trump's agenda.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
Okay.
In the Donald Trump era, Elizabeth Warren has been playing defense and trying to prevent Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees from rolling back protections that she helped enact.
Warren actually found herself rebuked by Mitch McConnell for reading a letter by Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions' record on racism during his confirmation.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
That moment became something that's on T-shirts, bumper stickers, slogans, and that really galvanized a lot of support for her. It's been very hard for Republicans to get much of anything done this year, and that's at least in part to this resistance movement that Elizabeth Warren has helped champion.
We are here to fight back.
Enough of Elizabeth Warren. Like you,
millions of dollars are being funneled to defeat Warren in the midterm elections in 2018. But it's the rumors of a 2020 presidential bid that has further prompted powerful donors to fund her opposition, often using the same playbook of constant and ruthless ad campaigns that many believe helped Trump win in 2016. It's anyone's guess if she will endure what Hillary could not.
You know, the question for Elizabeth Warren is whether she can go from being a liberal firebrand to somebody who can regularly get 60 votes for initiatives in the Senate and 218 in the House and drive an agenda, and whether she can bring together coalitions for political victories. That's the challenge, and we'll see what happens.
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has made some powerful opponents.
He doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements.
My message to Donald Trump and his team is that, your views of Islam are ignorant.
He's the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital and proud of it. This is how Sadiq Khan went from the son of Pakistani immigrants to a lawyer, lawmaker, and now the mayor of London. Khan's parents emigrated from Pakistan. His father was a bus driver, his mother a stay-at-home seamstress. The 10-strong Khan family squeezed into a 3-bedroom flat in South London. He wanted to be a dentist, but TV in the 1980s convinced him otherwise.
Objection!
LA law with its swagger and ill-fitting suits caught Khan's eye. He graduated in 1991 with a degree in law from North London University and joined a human rights firm. Khan worked a number of high-profile cases, often clashing with London's Metropolitan Police Force. But he had bigger political ambitions.
This is what being a new MP is like, squatting on a bench in the absence of an office, dealing with letters from constituents.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion here in London.
And there's just explosions, and then it was just smoke everywhere.
Everyone's just asking what's happened.
Only 2 months after Khan entered the Commons as a Member of Parliament, London was attacked by Islamist extremists.
That day will stay with me for the rest of my life.
He spoke out against the attacks both as a London MP and as a Muslim.
He has been very clear about his opposition to violence, opposition to terrorism, and has set out to make the case for a more open and peaceful Islam.
That's Thomas Penny, one of Bloomberg's Westminster correspondents.
Here is a man who is a Muslim, and he is standing up and being open and straightforward and being clear that the problem here is not Islam, but it's Islamic extremism.
In 2015, a decade after the attacks, Khan ran for mayor of London, and his faith was back in the headlines. His opponent, Zach Goldsmith, trying to link Khan to radical Islam.
The debate got again personal and nasty. The Goldsmith camp has called Khan extreme and accused him of associating with, quote, those who seek to do our police and capital harm.
It's a pattern of behaviour.
Even the former Prime Minister David Cameron repeated the allegations.
He shared a platform with Sajil Shahid, the man who trained the ringleader of the 7/7 attacks and accused the United States of bringing 9/11 on themselves.
But the smears didn't stick.
Zach Goldsmith ran a very negative campaign that was based on what people knew was a lie.
This election was not without controversy. And I'm so proud that London has today chosen hope over fear and unity over division.
After taking the mayor's office with a comfortable majority, Khan has brought a business-like efficiency to the role, scrapping expensive vanity projects like the Garden Bridge and the new Routemaster buses, which cost £350,000 each. The former lawyer who used to fight the police in court is now praised for his close relationship with them.
I was talking to a very senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police who said there was a sea change when he went into City Hall, and the police were saying how much they welcomed this because they knew where they stood and it was more straightforward to work with. So he works like a lawyer, he works like a government minister.
Khan's kept his faith at the fore. He's an outspoken voice for moderate Muslims across the world.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, by giving the impression that Islam and the West are incompatible, you're playing into the hands of the extremists.
The ongoing spat between Khan and US President Donald Trump escalated when Trump went after Khan, misquoting him on Twitter just hours after the terrorist attacks of June 3rd, 2017. Khan's now one of the most prominent Labour politicians in the UK. In fact, a recent poll of Londoners found Khan was more trusted to keep the country safe from terrorism than the Prime Minister or the Labour leader. His story of going from the son of an immigrant bus driver to the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the world plays well with Londoners. But can he appeal to the rest of the nation? Has Khan got his eye on the top job? And is the UK ready for a Muslim Prime Minister?
What does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning. He used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the Collateral Murder Video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan War Logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq War Logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats could face real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks.
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
When it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all, suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring, other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
People think of Vladimir Putin, they think of capital P, power. And that's exactly the impression he creates. Whether it's physical power, firing different weapons, riding in various James Bond-esque modes of transportation, or tossing hapless opponents in judo. Or political power, ruling his own country with an iron fist, crushing his political opposition, or, most recently, being accused of meddling in foreign elections for his own benefit. This is how Vladimir Putin went from a poor, tough kid in Leningrad to a KGB spy to the very symbol of modern Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. His father was a factory foreman and his mother a homemaker. It is widely said that Putin's public-facing tough guy persona can be traced back to him getting into fights when he was younger, which paved the way for him to take up judo. After getting a law degree from Leningrad State University, Putin joined the KGB Foreign Intelligence Service. He spent 16 years in the KGB. When Putin returned to Russia, he began his political career.
He went to work for Anatoly Sobchak, who was then the mayor of St. Petersburg.
That's Leonid Bershidsky.
I'm a columnist at Bloomberg View.
Putin thrived in Sobchak's administration because
he was sort of considered pretty efficient city official at that time. He was very loyal to Sobchak.
So loyal and efficient that
he was noticed by Yeltsin's close circle.
And those people soon brought Putin over to Moscow to work in Yeltsin's administration, where he quickly climbed the political ladder.
Then, of course, he was promoted to Prime Minister of Russia.
That's Dmitry Trenin.
I am currently director of the Carnegie Moscow Center.
Around this time, Yeltsin and the people around him, the so-called family, decided that Putin would become Yeltsin's successor. And then this happened. The apartment bombings were carried out in 3 Russian cities, killing 293 people and injuring more than 1,000. Putin immediately accused Chechen separatists for the bombings and followed it up with action.
He was credited with having a very successful military campaign against the terrorists.
And it worked.
After that, he became an heir apparent in the eyes of the Russian people.
3 months later, Yeltsin resigned. And on his way out, a famous exchange.
He was getting into the car in the Kremlin, and the last words that he addressed to Putin before getting into his car
So Putin took over as president, and 3 months after that, won his first election. But just because Putin won the presidency, that didn't mean he had all the power. This is Michael McFall.
I was U.S. ambassador from 2012 to 2014. In the 1990s, there was a fire sale of all the things worth owning in Russia, and certain people,
the oligarchs,
did better than others in that fire sale, sometimes called privatization, and those people tended to be well connected with the Yeltsin regime, and they weren't Putin's friends. But they probably miscalculated, thinking that they could easily find a way to influence him. It became impossible almost from the start. From that very moment, there was warfare between him and the oligarchs.
That's when Putin gave the oligarchs a choice. Putin's way?
Some of those people from the 90s managed to figure out a new way of dealing with Putin and have survived.
Or prison.
Others could not find common vision, and so they lost their assets.
Khodorkovsky once was Russia's richest person, worth $15 billion, but he ran afoul of President Vladimir Putin and spent a decade in prison.
With domestic power consolidated, Putin focused on restoring Russia's global influence.
Putin is the guy who believes in the expansionist Russian state. Georgia and Ukraine and all the other Soviet republics that split off when the Soviet Union fell apart, he still believes that they're traditional Russian satellites. A lot of his strategy is about keeping them in the orbit. That Yeltsin line, take good care of Russia, that's how he understands it.
And he used annexation and invasion, as well as oil, gas, and trade to keep former Soviet republics in Russia's orbit. In 2008, Putin's 2 terms were up, and he decided to step down as president. Dmitry Medvedev stepped in as president, and Putin went back to prime minister. But really,
Putin never left power. He pretty much continued running the country, and Medvedev was a bit of a figurehead.
There was actually a period of cooperation between Russia and the U.S. that benefited both countries during Medvedev's presidency.
Because Medvedev did not have the same negative attitude towards the West as Putin did.
But when Putin came back to run for a 3rd term, in the lead up to the 2012 election, it is widely believed that both the presidential and parliamentary elections were rigged, and Russians took to the streets. Putin blamed the protests squarely on America, and more specifically, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
He believed that she had sent, and this is his words, a signal to demonstrators.
Still, Putin won by a huge margin and set about crushing the protest movement immediately upon his return to the Kremlin. Over the next few years, Russia's economy tumbled. Putin annexed Crimea, leading to sanctions. The price of oil fell drastically. The ruble hit a new low, and America played down Russia's influence, with Obama calling Russia a regional power. Despite all of that, Putin's approval rating remained sky high, and then an opportunity for payback.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
In 2016, there was one candidate who called Vladimir Putin very smart.
Trump exhibited tolerance towards Putin's actions annexing Crimea, and similar views on NATO and sanctions.
Secretary Clinton didn't support any of those views.
Even though Putin denies any wrongdoing,
U.S. election. Yes.
The U.S. has accused Russia of being behind the leaking of 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails, which many say helped Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Which leaves us here, with the possibility of a President Putin until 2024, positioning Russia to be the world power he always imagined it should be.
Jack Ma is Asia's richest man and most recognizable business tycoon. He's the chairman of Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant and one of the 10 largest companies in the world. Yet he still wants more.
We know where we're going. We want to be the 5th largest economy.
Big words from the man some call Asia's Jeff Bezos. He's confident, he's charismatic, and he's definitely not the average CEO. This is how a poor school teacher went from the classroom to being one of the most influential multi-billionaires in the world. Ma was born in China's southeastern city Hangzhou in 1964. His parents were traditional musician storytellers. As a teenager, he started to learn English from foreign tourists after China opened up in the late 1970s.
And then for 9 years, Jack Ma hung around outside the Hangzhou Hotel, which is now called the Shangri-La. He would get up at 5 a.m. to talk to travelers.
That's Bloomberg technology reporter Lulu Chen.
And I cover China Internet for Bloomberg.
Ma failed China's National University entrance exam twice before being admitted to local teachers' college. He graduated in 1988. He applied for 30 jobs and got rejected, including from the fast food giant KFC.
When KFC came to China, come to us say, 24 people went for the job. 23 people accepted. I was the only one guy.
Then Ma got a job at a local university and taught English there for about 5 years, earning just $15 a month. On the side, he started a translation company with several friends. During a company trip to the US in 1995, Ma had his first encounter with the internet at a friend's place in Seattle.
I searched the first word, beer. I don't know why, because it's easy to spell, baby. And I see beers from Germany, beers from USA, beers from Japan, but there's no beer from China.
So he searched for the word China instead and still couldn't find anything. And that got him thinking. He wanted to build something that would put China on the world's map.
He started China Pages, a Yellow Pages-like website, but it didn't take off. Then Ma joined a government agency in Beijing to help set up a website. By 1999, the internet stock boom had gripped Wall Street, and back in his Hangzhou apartment, Ma decided to try again. With his wife and a group of friends, Ma raised $80,000 and set up Alibaba, a site that allowed businesses to sell stuff to each other.
人家美国人强就强它的硬件，强就强它的系统建设这一方面确实比你早，但是玩信息玩软的，中国的脑袋绝不比你们差。我们在座的所有的人的脑袋绝不比你们差。
By 2000, Alibaba had raised $25 million from investors, including Goldman Sachs and SoftBank.
He had no business plan and zero revenue, but his eyes was very strong eyes.
In 2003, Alibaba started Taobao, a platform for individual sellers to trade with each other, and publicly declared war against eBay, who had started to make a foray into China.
Jack Ma has this famous saying that Alibaba is a crocodile in the Yangtze River, whereas eBay is a shark in the ocean. And if they fight eBay in the ocean, then they'll lose. But if they fight them in the Yangtze River, then they have a home base advantage.
In 2007, just 1 year after it forced eBay out of China, Alibaba debuted its business-facing division on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. But it delisted 5 years later as its performance sagged. But in 2014, Alibaba raised $25 billion in the world's biggest IPO in New York. Everybody should have a dream. What if that dream comes true? After achieving dominance in the business of e-commerce in China, Alibaba has been building an internet empire worth $472 billion, with businesses in cloud computing, online video streaming, movie production, healthcare, sports, retail, and even news media.
Alibaba buying into South China Morning Post really raised eyebrows. This is the largest English newspaper in Hong Kong, and it shows that Jack Ma's ambitions weren't limited to e-commerce. He wanted to influence not just Chinese users, but also overseas users as well.
The US has criticized Alibaba for allowing companies to sell counterfeit and poorly made goods, but in China, it enjoys the favor of China's government. It's part of Ma's company philosophy.
In love with the government, but don't marry with them.
Jack Ma is an extremely fortunate man for jumping on the internet sector so early. Note that this is a person who has no coding skills at all. He's a natural showman and a gifted public speaker and really able to convince others to believe in his vision.
Ma's vision of growing Alibaba to be the world's 5th largest economy faces strong competition at home and abroad. It will require more than just naked ambition and charisma, but Ma is great at getting himself in the right place at the right time. So far, it's served him well.
Peter Thiel is a walking contradiction. He got his bachelor's and Juris Doctorate from Stanford, but speaks out about the horrors of higher education, saying college is
as corrupt as the Catholic Church was 500 years ago.
He's a staunch supporter of the free press, yet he bankrolled a lawsuit to bankrupt an independent media company.
But these were not journalists.
And most of all, he's an immigrant libertarian who's the most public supporter of Donald Trump in all of Silicon Valley.
What Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away.
This is the story of how an openly gay, immigrant genius, libertarian billionaire went from tech contrarian to Silicon Valley's biggest Trump supporter. Peter Thiel was born on October 11, 1967 in Frankfurt, West Germany, to Suzanne and Klaus Thiel. Peter's family emigrated to Cleveland, Ohio when he was 1. An Ayn Rand devotee during his youth, Thiel attended Stanford University majoring in philosophy.
His Stanford experience shaped a really big part of
who he decided to surround himself with.
That's Lizette Chapman.
And I cover technology and venture capital here at Bloomberg.
He and his Stanford friends made their first big splash in tech with PayPal. After selling to eBay for $1.5 billion, they would become known as the PayPal Mafia for each incredible success after PayPal. For Thiel, that began with an early, modest $500,000 investment in Facebook.
And in VC speak, early means big risk, but also big reward. He turned that initial $500,000 investment into more than $1 billion in cash.
But Thiel was just getting started with Facebook, and he went on to make a whole bunch of wildly successful investments.
From SpaceX to Airbnb to one of the largest, most powerful companies in the United States, if not the world, and of course that's Palantir.
The incredibly controversial secret of data mining startup he founded with his colleagues from PayPal. It connects data silos and then allows non-technical people to search that information for patterns. Data like
financial information, feeds from video cameras, biometric details, passport information, flight manifest.
Palantir doesn't talk much about how they collect this data, who has access to it, or what they do with it. But they have contracts with
the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA and the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission
and several other federal agencies. It's the richest company you've never heard of, valued at $20 billion. But there are plenty of obscenely wealthy people in Silicon Valley. What makes him different...
He's a complex ball of multiple contradictions.
Take college, for example. Even though college was extremely important for Thiel, there's something called the Thiel Fellowship.
In exchange for dropping out and a promise not to pursue college, Thiel would give them $100,000 each.
You basically tell people that if you get a diploma, you're saved. Otherwise you go to hell. You go to Yale or you go to jail.
Also, his relationship with the press.
New order placed to buy euro at 1.18.093. Okay, I placed order. Let's see.
2007, one of Gawker Media's blogs, ValueAg, outed him as gay. And with the lawsuit, he
found an opportunity to get back at them by funding the lawsuit that Hulk Hogan was able to bring then, but he wouldn't have been able to do that without Thiel's money.
And finally, Thiel's biggest contradiction, his endorsement of Donald Trump.
When he was asked about his support for Trump, he was surprised at the outrage that came with it from many of his colleagues in Silicon Valley. He didn't want more of the establishment.
No matter how crazy this election seems, it is less crazy than the condition of our country.
After briefly supporting Carly Fiorina in the primaries, Thiel pivoted to Trump, donating $1.25 million to Trump and his associated super PACs in October 2016. And he didn't just help Trump financially. He gave a full-throated keynote speech supporting Trump at the Republican National Convention.
I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America.
And when Trump was finally elected, Thiel was given the reins to an enormous amount of power.
And I want to thank you, man. You have a very special guy.
He was named the transitional advisor. And in that role, he did a lot of interviewing and a lot of vetting to fill hundreds of cabinet positions and different jobs within the administration.
But it turns out, Thiel's support isn't unconditional.
Talking to people who spend time with him, I have also heard that he is no longer a great supporter of Trump.
It was reported that Thiel was unhappy with the direction of Trump's presidency. Ever since, he's been mum, making no public appearances, no statements, and staying out of the spotlight altogether. Although there have been suggestions that Trump could tap Thiel for a top intelligence post or ambassadorship, there's no indication he'd accept.
He's described his relationship with politics as schizophrenic. He gets really involved, and then he runs away as fast as possible.
Whether Thiel takes a new position or simply continues as a board director at Facebook and Palantir, at just 50 years old, he's primed to wield some serious influence in technology and politics for decades to come.
2016 was again the hottest year on record, and the previous 17 years have seen our 16 most scorching. Scientists overwhelmingly agree. Global warming is the culprit. And it's just getting started. Ice caps, extreme weather, wildfires, droughts, and the hits keep coming. What are we doing about it? In 2015, the world took its boldest step yet to stem climate change with a historic accord in Paris. But now comes the hard part. Nations must change energy policies and invest huge amounts of money, and they will likely do it without the United States. President Donald Trump announced on June 1st that the U.S. would withdraw from the accord.
The reality is that withdrawing is in America's economic interest and won't matter much to the climate.
Here's the situation. Decades in the making, the Paris Agreement united the U.S., China, and more than 190 other nations in a push to limit fossil fuel pollution. The UN-sponsored plan secured pledges to cut greenhouse gases, the emissions that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, in an effort to avoid the rising seas and other environmental disasters that climate models predict. But even if all pledges are met, the globe is expected to warm by as much as 3.4 degrees Celsius this century, more than the UN target of well below 2 degrees. Meeting the Paris Agreement means that governments will have to offer more incentives for clean energy, scale back support for fossil fuels, make emissions more costly, and reduce deforestation. It's estimated that the deal will require $13.5 trillion of spending through 2030. Here's the argument. Unlike past climate pacts such as the Kyoto Protocol, each country set its own Paris targets and then promised to revisit and improve them. The U.S. was primed to play a lead role in climate change, but Trump's Energy Independence Executive Order reverses Obama-era rules and directives put in place to combat climate change, and expands production of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel. The resulting policies threaten the global fight against climate change. Without the U.S. commitment to emissions reduction, other countries may join it in abandoning the Paris Agreement. This could make it almost impossible and even more expensive down the line to stop climate change. Optimists argue that the shift to a lower carbon future is already underway. Businesses, cities, and U.S. states, such as California, are already investing in wind and solar and taking other steps to make it work.
I've actually been called an environmentalist, if you can believe that.
There's an inherent attraction to light and being human. And I think on a very deep psychological level, light is this way in which we experience the energy surrounding us in a very personal manner. My name is Matt Dilling. I'm the founder of Light Bright Neon Studio, and we manufacture, produce, and restore neon works of art and design. Origins of the creative content of a lot of the work at Light Bright comes from a variety of sources. Sometimes people come with a napkin sketch, some people come with an Adobe Illustrator file, and we have a whole design team who then we kind of work together to help create layouts of what it might look like. Scale it up and create a paper template using a pen plotter. And that paper template actually becomes our guide for what we're going to bend the neon to. We take from the office into the glass shop. We pick out the right size tubing with the right color for the right size project. From there, we heat up the glass tubing. The torches heat the glass well in excess of 1,000 degrees in order for it to get into its molten state. We heat up and bend the glass tubing to match the template. One of our chandeliers has over 100 different bends in it. So each one of those bends has to be marked for a heated up bend. We also have to allow the glass to cool between the bends so that the next area can be worked on and heated up in its own unique fashion. It turns into spaghetti, and then we have to make sure that that spaghetti lines back up and cools to the template. We use a blow hose to connect our mouth to the tube, create a volume that's closed, and we can control the pressure in there with our mouth. There's just a variety of challenges that come up inherently in working with glass. Glass can crack due to stress, and sometimes you'll just have a batch that all it wants to do when it gets near a torch is crack. After we've bent various components, we have to go in using the crossfire or the hand torch and actually weld all of those pieces together. The last step on that is then to weld on electrodes onto either end. Each one of those steps is very, very specific. I draw inspiration from so many different experiences. It's hard to come up with one thing that's particular, but one of the ways that I really am able to connect with the creative is to float. Floating is a similar experience to meditation, to psychedelics. Going into a blackened room and laying out in a body of water and salt that's heated to your body temperature, and it allows for all sort of external stimulation to fall away. And your internal world really begins to bubble up and manifest. You really get to experience a different relationship to your mind. I work with neon because I can't not work with it. It's so challenging and so rewarding. And those things are so intertwined that there's no way of separating it out. I learn so much and continue to learn so much by working with it. I find so much inspiration in working with it, and I just continue to experience new and different things through the medium. It's that close to me at this point. Once the neon tube is completed, we have to hook it up to our manifold for bombarding. The manifold is opened, a vacuum is drawn. We check the tube for leaks with our Tesla coil. We close the tube back off, and we heat it up using a very large and powerful transformer. As the tube is heated up, it releases anything that's not inert inside the tube, and we evacuate that out. We introduce the gas into it. and we seal the tube off, sealing into that tube whatever gas we introduced into it. I think my favorite part of making a neon light is when I see it lit up for the first time. Different gases, when electrified, emit different wavelengths of light. Neon gas is this very bright orange, fiery red color. Argon gas creates a very intense blue, but that light output that is produced can then be expressed in a different wavelength by coating the inside of the tubes with a phosphor coating that takes that one wavelength of light and emits a different wavelength. We bring it over to the aging table where we hook it up to an age-in transformer and allow it to settle, age the gas in that we've introduced to it. There's always a stray particle of something left inside the tube. But that time that the oxide coating can act to scrub whatever is left inside the tube while things are getting settled into place. Once the tubes are aged in, we move on to our process of assembling two halves of the fixture together in a jig, gluing up the center of the fixture to its spindle. Once the adhesive dried, we would connect the wires from the fixture together into a transformer, and we turn on power and it lights up. Part of what we love about what we do here is that we try and put out into the world the kind of things that we'd like to see. I still am surprised when it lights up. I'm still excited when I get to see it illuminated. There's an ineffable quality to it. To me, is this insight into the inner workings of the universe. It literally is. It's a way of looking at what is surrounding us in the cosmos in a new light.
Well, I have to remove the order to buy euro. See, we didn't have a chance to purchase. So next time probably will be better time. So the order to buy euro removed.
It's a bit like an addiction. You've got to make something. You have to do something. It's borderline obsession. And every bike we build is my favourite bike at the time, and as soon as it's done, I want to build another one. Sven Cycles is something I've been thinking about ever since I started cycling in my late teens. We want bikes that ultimately you'll really enjoy riding. There's never a bike that's the same. There's always a slight change. And as we build them individually as well, they have the marks of a bike that's built by hand. Most people I know cycle have an idea of their dream bicycle, and it may be an evolving idea you've had in your head. And we've worked with a lot of people that have come to us with sketches and scrapbooks. It's really, really nice to build something that's just one-off and unique. I think a lot of people see a bicycle as two wheels and a frame in the middle. There are a lot of subtle changes and nuances in design which can change the riding characteristics quite dramatically. I'm a really big fan of modernist architecture, and the simplicity of a modernist building is really hard to achieve. And with some of our bikes, they may look very simple, but I think people should not underestimate the time and effort that goes into designing a product. Tubing is key to a bike's feel and ride. Reynolds tubing has been in my life ever since I can remember. Growing up, I could never afford a frame manufactured with their tubing. We can now put a badge on our bike saying manufactured at Reynolds, which is a sort of thing as a kid I just wouldn't have believed was going to happen. Every part of the bike has a specific tube. It's not universal. The first thing we do is get the tubes out, check they're correct, check the wall thicknesses, sand the edges, make sure it's all really clean, because if it's not clean, the tubes won't join together correctly. We build in steel because I still believe it's one of the best materials to use. It's been used in bikes since the late 1800s, and they're still using it now for a very good reason. It's the flexibility that we can replace the tube, repaint the bike, and you wouldn't know it's damaged. I just like working with it. It's very sculptural. This isn't sort of aerospace precision engineering. It's a steel rule and a marker. So when we're cutting the tubes, it's within a mil or two. But what we're trying to do is take the best from bicycle building in the past and add a little bit of modern flair to it. There's various techniques for building bicycles. We do a thing called fillet brazing, where you connect a pipe together. We use a bronze rod and a flame. We heat the tubes up to the same temperature and we fill the joint with bronze. And it gives a very, very sort of fluid, lovely, sort of quite sculptural feel. You've got to practice. You've got to be able to judge material temperatures. You've got to just look at it and you just get a feel for it. It's a stage where your tubes start to look a bit like a bicycle. My father's a jeweller. He'd make sort of very pretty things, which are lovely, but for me, they don't really have any function. What I love about bicycles, you can start on a Monday with a box of tubes. You can be riding it by the weekend, and it can last you for the rest of your life. Outside of the frame and forks, the other most important part is the wheels and tyres. When you build the wheels, you have to lace them, so there's little holes going all the way around the rim. You poke the spoke through. We do build all our wheels by hand here because a machine can't get 30 years worth of wheel building experience. Colour is very, very personal. With any of our bikes, you can have them painted whatever colour you want. We've matched one to the teapot, so we can get that scanned and we can match that, or someone's favourite item of clothing. I like to let the bike sit for 4 or 5 days minimum, just so the paint can have time to cure a little bit, and then we assemble it. We get out all the new components, and it's a case of putting them together. Some bikes you can assemble in 3 hours, some will take 3 days. And we've built bikes that cost in the £10,000 plus mark. Some people, they're saving up and this is their bike and they're going to own it for the rest of their lives. So we just want to make sure they get the right thing. I think the bike for me was the first time I had some freedom. So as soon as I had one, I was off. A lot of people still get that thrill as when they were a kid blasting down a hill, wind going through their hair. It's fun. Everyone has their favourite jacket or something that just makes them feel good. If you've got a bike that fits well, you actually feel part of it. Building bicycles as a creative outlet is fantastic. It's not something you do because you're going to get a big paycheck at the end of the day. You do it something you have a passion for it.
If you ever saw a wooden surfboard, it was probably hanging in somebody's house or underneath the deck. But kind of in the last 10 or 15 years, wood has made a big comeback. They surf wonderfully. It's beautiful and it feels great to be on one of them. I always had a love for wood and kind of passionate about things that went in the water. I've kind of been around wooden boats most of my life. There's just so much character. The way they're built, the stories that come with them, a lot of that has translated over to why we build surfboards the way we do. When we first started thinking about building surfboards, wood was the natural material we chose. They have a very high strength to weight ratio. Wooden surfboards have the longest history of use in the surf world than any other material. People have been surfing wooden surfboards since kind of the first documented history of people riding waves. The board starts in CAD, where we take a 3D model, break down the shape, and kind of create frames and templates and all the inner parts of the board that we get cut on a CNC machine. We take those frames and we just pop them out, assemble the frame into kind of a skeleton. go out to our lumber shed, pick a bunch of cedar, and bring them into our mill shop, put glue along the edges, clamp it all together into a panel. Everything's book matched. You have symmetry in the colors and texture of the wood. Cut your outline. Take our assembled frame, gently put it down right on top of the plank. Once that foundation is started, you're basically building up the three-dimensional shape, the outside part of the board, using lots of strips that kind of interlock and fit together. Every piece of wood is going to be different, and it's all going to react differently. There are frustrations with it, but I think that's one of the things that keeps it challenging. You learn to read the kind of what the grain lines are doing and what the color of the wood is telling you. Once those rails are cleaned up, we put our top planks on. It's a little bit like putting a lid on a box. It's like, this is it. Whatever's inside that board is staying inside that board. And by tensioning some rope, you can clamp the two together. It's like a time capsule. What makes our boards unique are they are built right here in York. They're built using material that grows right here in the state of Maine. They're built 100% by hand by local craftspeople and surfers. There's a lot of time that goes into these boards, between 40 and 60 hours start to finish. We wanted to build surfboards that were as hollow as they could be, but still be strong enough to work well. Too light and they don't surf well, but too heavy and they don't surf well. So there's a balance point there, and that's where we try to be. Taking the board off the rocker table once the top has gone on, that is by far one of my top favorite parts. It's just you and a shaping stand, a board, and a hand plane. Everything else is out of your view. It's simple, it's pleasurable, it's quiet. You can be with your thoughts and you can just kind of be present. There's something about taking a nice sharp edge tool to a beautiful piece of wood and feeling the curls coming off and knowing that every pass that you're making, you're kind of getting it closer and closer to what you have in mind. Once we've shaped it down and the board's looking like it's supposed to look like, it's time for it to go into the glassing room. 4-ounce fiberglass, laying it over the board, draping it over the edges, cutting it, applying epoxy, and on the board. Once both sides are lamb coated, it's time to put in the hardware. Drill and router and install the fin box. And on the other side, we drill and put in the leash plug and a vent. There's a lot of air just naturally inside the board, and that air wants to expand and contract with temperature changes. And that vent has a little piece of Gore-Tex fabric in it, and it allows air to kind of breathe both ways, but it doesn't allow water to get in. Once all that hardware is put in, it goes back into the glassing room. We brush a nice, beautiful, thick coat of epoxy over the whole surface, and that we call a gloss coat. That's supposed to look beautiful and glossy and shiny and flawless. You get to see that board come to life. Whatever the colors in the wood, they really come out. It just makes it look like candy. You just want to touch it and run your hands down it, and it's just kind of the icing on the cake. Once everything is hard, we put it into what we call the oven, get that epoxy to cure, really kind of bake it, and just get it to harden. Put in the fin, screw in the vent, and ship it out. We just love the idea of building something that's sustainable and long-lasting and made by hand. Kind of gives you a deeper connection to the product over something you might buy on a shelf. When a customer gets the board, they feel it. They 100% feel the amount of work and the amount of passion that went into the board. So I'm not really looking at hours and efficiency. We're looking at like doing it right and enjoying it as we go.
Ma Baoli, better known as Gang La, is one of the 4 grand marshals leading New York's Pride Parade this year. But in the country he comes from, being gay is still a social taboo. The CEO of a Beijing-based internet company is on a mission to improve the lives of millions of gay men in China.
对于每一个 LGBT 人群来说，即使这个国家不允许你跟同性爱人结婚，但是你仍然要勇敢地去选择你自己的生活，你仍然应该拥有幸福生活的权利。
Ma's company Blue City runs an app and a website specifically for gay men. Blued is one of the biggest gay social networking apps in the world, with an estimated 30 million registered users. Unlike most other apps, Blued is more than just dating or hookups.
大家可以在我们这个软件里面找他自己的情感，然后可以阅读相关的内容，然后可以进行一些娱乐，比如玩游戏啊，比如看直播啊等等。
Back in 2000, when Ma studied at a police school in northern China, he realized he didn't feel like everyone else.
因为他们都找女朋友，然后谈恋爱，但是我对长得好看的同性的男生，我反而觉得对我更有吸引力。所以那个时候我就到互联网上去找这样的一些资料，然后希望能够告诉我自己，我到底是谁。互联网上所有的信息都是负面的，都是错的，就是说同性恋要电击疗法，要被治疗，然后要吃药等等。
After visiting some foreign websites with different attitudes to homosexuality, Ma created his own site for a Chinese audience, encouraging people that
他们也是正常的，他们不用自卑，然后也不用自杀。
Even though attitudes towards homosexuals are slowly changing in China, it's still a social stigma. The virtual world of Blued, where members can be open about their sexuality, is for most a striking contrast to their real lives. This is live streaming, a function added to Blued in late 2015, right as the internet craze was starting to take off in China. Many self-made stars like Jin make decent amounts of money by receiving audiences' virtual currencies and gifts.
我们不是彼此的初恋，初恋这种事儿多不靠谱啊。
For Kyle and Klaus, a couple who have come out, live streaming on Blued means something different.
其实我经常会收到很多粉丝的一些互动的留言，就是类似就是说你们让我们看到了同志情侣之间的一些希望啊，我看到这样的留言我是很欣慰。
The government's rules for acceptable content online may shift quickly in China, with LGBT material in a grey area. Many companies feel the chill of the recent internet crackdown, but Blue City still runs as usual. Ma has won the Chinese government's trust by helping with HIV prevention among gay men. A third of the company's staff are dedicated to screening pornographic and politically sensitive content.
我不太多的愿意去对抗，我更多的愿意去对话，去改变他们的想法。我觉得这个可能在中国来说是更有效的。